really to stress the critical importance and role of water before, during, and after armed conflicts. We will hear from leading international experts, but also give the floor to rising stars, future professionals, and also hope for your audience's active participation in the discussion. But first, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Katja Alfors, Director of the Center for Peace Mediation at the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, who will set the scene for our session today and linking it also to the broader international processes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and glad to see that we still have some audience here, very aware of that we are coming towards the end of this World Water Week. It's a great honor to be giving this opening address, but before I cannot resist this opportunity to tell a little bit about our center, because this is the first time that the Center for Peace Mediation is participating in World Water Week. The reason being very obvious, we were only established less than 2 years ago. We have a number of thematic priorities, and water is one of the key ones, and that's why we are here. Over with the PR session. But warmly welcome on my behalf as well to this session. This session is based on the critical notion that water and sanitation should never be used as means of warfare. Yet, water resources and water infrastructure are used as strategic targets, and the control of these as a power tactic in several ongoing armed conflicts. In security analysis, water is increasingly depicted as a source or driver of conflict. Vulnerable groups, such as children and youth, are usually the ones most affected by the destruction of infrastructure, disruption of water, sanitation and hygiene services, and the deterioration of water ecosystems. The conveners and contributors of this session, our dear and distinguished partners, are all working towards the same goal. First of all, to ensure that human rights to water and sanitation and healthy environment are respected at times of armed conflicts. Secondly, water-related cooperation is seen as a catalyst and sustainer for peace. They all strive to influence global policies, principles, and practices to this end. As has been highlighted in several sessions during this World Water Week, the UN Water Conference is just around the corner. In March 2023, we will see the first water-specific UN conference in 46 years. The conference provides a strategic opportunity for taking critical water issues forward. This is why we plan to prepare an expert opinion, a piece from this side event to be delivered to the office of those in preparing for the event. Finland would have liked to see water and peace as a specific topic for an interactive dialogue at the water conference. But regardless whether there would be one, I believe that many of the topics to be discussed here today provide critical inputs to the conversations at the dialogues. Today's session will further unpack the value of water at different stages of armed conflicts and their prevention. The aim is to highlight both weaknesses and gaps to be filled in international frameworks and practices, and to underline available measures to safeguard the human rights to water and sanitation, water resources and infrastructure, and a healthy environment for all. Advancing peace and preventing conflicts are at the heart of Finland's foreign and security policy. In water diplomacy, preventive measures such as strengthening transboundary cooperation in the form of legal agreements, joint institutions, and shared knowledge base, are considered increasingly important. Finland has played a key role in the initiation of the international water conventions, including the UNECE Water Convention, and continues to support its global uptake and implementation. Water and peace is one of the 3 pillars of Finland's international water strategy. We see water diplomacy, bringing together peace mediation and water experts to play a key role in enabling sustainable development and improved security for all. With these words, I wish you a good and active discussion, and I expect powerful messages to be taken forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. We'll soon give the floor to our panelists, but let us just first have a brief look at what science and recent events say about the role and value of water in armed conflicts. We've had several excellent sessions during this World Water Week related to this theme. And despite the tendency of popular media from time to time to fuel the water wars discourse, I think that within this community, it's very clear that that relationship is much more nuanced, and linkages to cooperation and peace are strong, but still need support. The relationship between water and conflicts could be potentially conceptualized from 3 angles. First, water may be used as a weapon or a strategic resource in conflict. When it comes to the former, this may mean destruction of infrastructure, cutting water supply, or flooding land, making movement of armed forces or the civilians more difficult. With the latter, control of resources or infrastructure can be used to pressurize civilians, but providing access to water can also be a way to have their consent. Secondly, water can be a victim in armed conflicts, with direct impacts like destruction of infrastructure, deterioration of water resources and ecosystems, leading to sickness and death. And indirectly and over long term, this may entail social vulnerability, economic problems, militarization, collapse of water management governance, deteriorating supply and state of the environment. And third, water may indeed be a source or a driver of conflict, but the research evidence shows that water and conflict are increasingly linked, but water is never the only reason in international conflict. Instead, it's a part of a longer chain of escalation and often spillover effects as well. Structural risks related to water's conflict potential include, for example, dependence on agriculture in water-scarce environment, political inequalities and governance failures, among others. Climate change is, of course, an amplifying factor, but on the other hand, knowledge regarding its current and future impacts helps to also identify potential areas of conflict, but also needed preventive and mitigating measures. And finally, as several sessions this week have stated, water holds a great potential for peace in the form of joint water agreements and cooperative arrangements, and instead of fighting over limited resources, really untapping the benefits of cooperation. And that said, while we have global water conventions, principles and guidance in place, a lot more attention by the water and peace communities should be put on the implementation. How are these different aspects then visible throughout the world today? Transboundary Freshwater Dispute Database, Water Peace and Security Partnership, UNICEF, ICRC, among others, have in recent years developed excellent tools to track the role of water in conflicts and cooperation and their repercussions to water supply and infrastructure. And I'm naming here just a few examples. In Syria, severe drought conditions were part of the chain of the escalation. In Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq and Syria, war and conflict have led to the collapse of water infrastructure, lack of access to safe wash, disease and death affecting the children the hardest. On the other hand, in the Sava Basin after the Yugoslav wars, fruitful water collaboration now exists between Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia and Slovenia. After the Second World War, Finland has really put effort in building good relations to all our neighbors, building fruitful transboundary cooperation. And while our cooperation with Russia is at the moment stalled due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that cooperation has also been ranked among the best in the world. On the Nile, international community has actively supported cooperation over the years. Water thus has and will continue to have a critical role in the dynamic interaction between different parties at local, national and transboundary levels, where conflict and cooperation often also coexist. But let's now turn to our panelists and hear from them in more detail what are the weaknesses and gaps in our current international frameworks, how we could work towards ensuring that destructive impacts of armed conflicts to water and sanitation and water resources more broadly could be prevented, and how we can really harness the cooperative power of water to promote and sustain peace. I'll first invite Dr. Mara Tignino, reader at the Faculty of Law and lead legal specialist of the Platform for International Water Law at the Geneva Water Hub, to talk about legal protection of water during armed conflicts. And as a discussant to Mara, we have Ms. Dominique Steinbrecher from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, who is joining us online. But Mara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suvi. Many thanks for the kind introduction. So my task today is to explore some existing legal frameworks and give you examples of the gaps of these frameworks. So according to the portal of the rule of law in armed conflict of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, there are around 110 armed conflicts around the world. Some of these conflicts make the headlines, others are not mentioned in the media and are less known or not even known by the public. Some of these conflicts started recently, while others have lasted over 50 years. UNICEF and ICRC have documented the attacks against water facilities during armed conflict and the harm on the civilian population, especially the most vulnerable, such as the children. International humanitarian law, or IHL, applies during international and non-international armed conflict, including in occupied territories. IHL contains 3 fundamental rules for the protection of water infrastructure, water resources, including transboundary ones. The first is the obligation not to attack objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian populations, such as water supplies and irrigation works. The second rule is the prohibition to attack installation containing dangerous forces, such as dams and dikes. And the third principle is the prohibition to use methods or means of warfare that are intended or may be expected to cause widespread, long-term and severe damage to the natural environment, including water ecosystems. However, these rules are far from being perfect. I will give you now some examples of weaknesses of this prohibition in the context of international armed conflicts. Regarding the prohibition to attack, destroy, remove or render useless water installation, this prohibition is lifted when these installations are used only for the members of armed forces or in direct support of military action. However, IHL confers strict limits to these exceptions. Even when water infrastructure are only used by military forces, the attacks against them must not leave the civilian population deprived of water and cause its starvation or cause their displacement. The second limitation to the rule is in relation to the scorched earth strategies. IHL considers that even in the case of military necessity, of imperative military necessity, a party to an armed conflict may have the right to destroy water facilities only in the part of its own territory which is under its own control, but it must not carry out such destruction in the part of the territory which is under the control of the enemy. A third limitation is the extent of the protection of water-related installations. For example, to what extent IHL protect electrical facilities? Electricity may be needed for the functioning of water installations, and the prohibition to attack water-related installations such as electrical facilities must be therefore recognized. There are also exceptions in relation to the protection of dams and dikes. Even if these objects are protected even when they meet the requirements of military objectives, military attacks are only prohibited if these attacks may cause the release of dangerous forces, namely water, and when this release of water may cause severe losses among the civilian population. However, does IHL protect dams when they are only under the control of a party to an armed conflict? As a party to an armed conflict, the right to threat the civilian population of opening or closing the flow of the water? This situation is not explicitly covered under IHL. Moreover, a specific derogation to the rule protecting dams and dikes is when they are used in regular, significant, and direct support of military operations, and when this attack is the only feasible way to terminate such support. As you can see, there are several conditions to be met. The military support must be in a cumulative way, regular, significant, and direct, and all these three criteria must be met. The second condition is the attack must be the only way to terminate such support. Although the derogations to these prohibitions are very strict, the prohibition is not absolute. Third, regarding the protection of the natural environments of the water resources, including transboundary ones, IHL only prohibits attacks which are intended or may be expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment. This means that the three criteria must be met in a cumulative way, and these three adjectives fix a very high threshold of damage. For example, long-term means that the damage must last for decades and not only for several months. As a consequence, these criteria only are met in situations of extreme pollution of water resources. I would like to conclude this presentation and give you some examples of the challenges regarding the legal protection of water during armed conflict. Today, many conflicts take place in cities. A city can be encircled or sieged by one party to a conflict. This strategy, as we all know, has several impacts on the civilian population, which may be deprived of water, electricity, and other services essential to its survival. This war strategy is not prohibited as such under IHL. However, IHL provides that parties to an armed conflict must ensure access to humanitarian organizations to meet the needs of the civilian population. Moreover, if attacks takes place during the siege of a city, the parties to a conflict must respect all the rules relating to the conduct of hostilities, meaning the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions. One principle that is particularly important is the principle of proportionality. In this case, the parties to a conflict must take into account not only the direct impacts of the attack against a military objective, but also the indirect and the reverberating impacts that are foreseeable at the time of the attack. Many times, indirect and reverberating impacts are more strong on the civilian population. Damage to water infrastructure and water-related infrastructure can, for example, lead to a shortage of drinking water or water needed for food production, which can lead to epidemics or famine. The damage to civilian critical infrastructure is likely to have a domino effect on other installations that contribute to the supply of drinking water, as well water used for irrigation. Current armed conflicts show the importance of promoting the knowledge of international humanitarian law by armed forces from the high commandment to the troop soldier in relation to water installation and water resources. The civilian population is too often deprived of water during an armed conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara, for a very thorough explanation of the means we have with international humanitarian law at the moment. We have Dominic Steinbrecher online also giving a perspective of other legal instruments that could be used to protect water in times of armed conflicts. Dominic, I hope you can hear us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you, and I hope everyone can hear me too.
Yes, and see you too.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for including me in this very interesting discussion. So, as you just have mentioned, IHL is not only the only applicable branch during armed conflict, but it also interplays with other branches of international law that are already applicable during peacetime and which remain applicable during conflicts. And this has been widely acknowledged, particularly in the case of international human rights law by multiple international tribunals, human rights bodies, and vast state practice. Further, according to International Law Commission's draft articles on the effect of armed conflicts on treaties, as a general principle, the existence of a conflict does not necessarily per se terminate or suspend operation of the treaties that are in force. Concrete examples given by the Commission refer specifically in addition to international protection of the natural environment. And these branches of international law result very important and indispensable to fill the gaps that Mara has already mentioned in the protection of water and water infrastructure during armed conflicts, which are not covered or addressed with this less detail in IHL. Under international human rights law, the human rights to water and sanitation are key and entitle everyone to sufficient, safe, acceptable, and physical, accessible, and affordable water. Water has been recognized as a prerequisite for the realization and fulfillment of other human rights and human dignity. This right is protected under the existing legally binding UN human rights treaties under the right to life, integrity of the person, to adequate housing and food, to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, and specifically under the right to an adequate standard of living, as water is one of the most fundamental conditions for survival. Human rights law provides a detailed framework for states' obligation to respect, protect, fulfill water and sanitation, which is very important to complement and to fill the existing gaps under IHL. This includes both obligations of a negative character, meaning non-interference, but also positive obligations of states, and both in the assessment on the effects of particular attacks in the context of hostilities on water and water services and infrastructure, but particularly in situations of change of regulatory control, such as occupation, as acknowledged by the International Court of Justice. The protection of natural environment, of which water is an integral part of it, has also gained attention under human rights law, as the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago has acknowledged this year that the right to a clean, health, and sustainable environment is a human right. The promotion of this right requires the full implementation of treaty and customary international environmental law, which is also applicable during armed conflict and complements the protection of the environment as affirmed also by the International Court of Justice. Environmental law includes obligations of environmental protection, but also regulates the responsibility and potential liability for environmental damage. As asserted by the ICRC, the interplay between environmental law and IHL is very context-specific, but an important contribution to this relationship is the International Law Commission draft principles on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflicts. Some treaties, in addition, specifically provide for their application in armed conflicts. For example, the UN Watercourse Convention, which explicitly refers in its Article 29 to the protection of international watercourses and related installations, facilities and other works, but it further provides for the obligation of cooperation in good faith between watercourse states during armed conflict. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, returning to what Mara has just said, the interplay between these different branches that we have just mentioned during armed conflicts is very important to provide a robust protection of water and water infrastructure and fill the existing gaps. But nevertheless, there are still many challenges that need to be addressed, both in the legal and practical levels, in order to assure an adequate safeguard of these rights. And these include, first, the need to consider the interconnectedness and the interdependence of critical infrastructure in urban settings, including water, sanitation, and electrical facilities, but also the three cumulative elements of each essential services. And this includes the hardware, the consumables, and the human resources. And the three of them have to be considered in order to assure a holistic protection of water and water facilities. The effects on one of these components may affect the operation of the whole infrastructure, but also this may reverberate on other critical infrastructure with profound humanitarian impact on the civilian population, particularly if this is sustained in time. Moreover, there is a need to address the threat posed by new technologies over water and water infrastructure. For example, the effects of cyber operations, underwater and sanitation facilities. As demonstrated by real-life cases, cyber operations may have the ability to adversely impact water supply, its distribution, its treatment, and water safety, among other impacts, and this could have acute dangers to the civilian population. Finally, one of the main challenges is the implementation of the legal framework at the national level, and particularly the incorporation of the protection of water and water infrastructure in military manuals, rules of engagement, codes of conduct, and national policies in order to guarantee its practical application. It is vital for states to work on the adoption of concrete measures to assure the implementation, but particularly the operationalization of the law in practice. It is important also to foster the discussion of this issue in key international fora, such as the UN Water Conference dialogues, to engage multiple stakeholders in the rules and the principles applicable to the protection of water and water infrastructure during armed conflict. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dominic. And thank you and Mara for painting a very thorough picture of the current legal means we have to protect water in armed conflicts. And I trust that besides myself, the audience also has burning questions on how we could actually address the weaknesses and the gaps, but we will need to wait for the question and answer section for that, but do stay tuned. Let us then change the perspective a bit and move to the post-conflict settings. I have next the pleasure to give the floor first to Dr. Omar El-Hattab, Senior Advisor, Washing Emergency with UNICEF Program Division in New York and Head of the Washing Emergency and Fragile Contexts Unit. Omar will highlight to us the value and importance of WASH in post-conflict settings. And as a discussant to Omar, we have Ms. Cholpon Aitakunova, Research Fellow at the Collective Leadership Institute under the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation's International Climate Protection Fellowship and leader of the Central Asian Youth for Water Network. Please. And Cholpon, you can also join us online. Yeah. All right. Okay, that's fine. But first, Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Suvi. Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, a very good afternoon to you all. I'm delighted to be among you all today in this very important session examining the value of water during and after conflict. It's a very important session. But first of all, I really take the opportunity to extend our sincere gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of Finland for taking the lead on organizing this critical side event, for bringing us all together today, and for their invaluable partnership with UNICEF. It's really, really appreciated. I also take the opportunity to thank the Geneva Water Hub, CMI, and the Finnish Environment Institute for their partnership on this side event and beyond. UNICEF, a dual mandate UN agency. We have two mandates, humanitarian and development. We recognize that reaching children with reliable and essential wash services during and post-conflict is a complex task. However, our experience shows it's not impossible, it is doable. While WASH is a critical basic social service during armed conflict, it is a prerequisite for any type of return to normalcy in post-conflict settings. WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, is perhaps the most critical basic social service in post-conflict settings. Let me shed some light on what conflict means for children. Whether children and their families are displaced or stay at their places of origin within their same country, they are heavily taxed by the armed conflict. While the focus of the news headlines is oftentimes the damage caused by the conflict itself, diarrhea is the silent killer of children. UNICEF and WHO data shows that children under 5 are 20 times more likely to die from diarrheal disease as opposed to the violence in the conflict itself. I served in so many conflict-affected countries, and each country is a case in point. You can't really compare them. But let me try, in general terms, share some of the common characteristics of conflict-affected settings. In places of origin, houses will be affected by the conflict, perhaps damaged, power supplies disrupted, if any, wash services heavily affected or heavily dysfunctional. The setting is piled up with rubble and debris. Most other social services are dysfunctional or heavily affected, and so forth. Children and their families are in dire need for a sense of return to normalcy or being back home. They need to feel back home. They're open to change. They're willing to do anything for settling in back home, irrespective of whether they're displaced within the country or they are staying in places affected by the armed conflict and affected by the violence itself. And they're desirous for a peaceful life in their new places of settlement within their own country. Let's zoom down now on the value of WASH in post-conflict settings. In November of 2002, the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights adopted General Comment Number 15 on the right to water. Article I.1 states that the human right to water is indispensable for leading a life in human dignity. It's a prerequisite for the realization of other human rights. Furthermore, Comment Number 15 reiterates the same. The groundbreaking event took place on the 28th of July of 2010 through the Resolution 64/292, when the United Nations General Assembly explicitly recognized the human right to water and sanitation and acknowledged that clean drinking water and sanitation are essential to the realization of all human rights. The MDGs that ran until 2015 included water and sanitation under MDG 7, specifically MDG 7C, and it had its own targets. And while substantial progress was made, the world felt it was not comprehensive enough. It's against that backdrop that member states decided on a single Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, on water and sanitation, examining the entire water cycle. Clearly, water is central to all other SDGs. Without water, there is no development. Increasingly, global security analysis cite water as a strategic resource that, when not managed properly, can be a source of conflict and, in extreme cases, can even threaten national and regional security. This can be framed around two general spheres: water as a shared resource that is scarce and often has shared users and usages, which can come into conflict if the availability and distribution of water does not meet the needs and expectations of the users. The second sphere, WASH as a basic essential social service that is both essential for daily life and a human right, and when deprived or provided inequitably, can lead to tensions and civil unrest both between populations and the state or between the communities itself, hence threatening social cohesion both vertically and horizontally. However, while water and wash can be a source of conflict, they can also be positive drivers of social cohesion and contribute to peace building. A recent study, a UNICEF study, noted that countries that actively engage in water cooperation do not engage in conflict. Excuse me. There are very encouraging examples from UNICEF programs in many countries like Lebanon, Somalia, and others, where cooperation between communities to address wash issues is reducing inter-community violence, building trust and social cohesion. It gives us pleasure, and I take the opportunity to soft launch the peace building and conflict sensitivity tools and guidelines for WASH programming that UNICEF developed in support to the global humanitarian WASH sector. Let's now get into what does it really mean in practical terms. How do you feel when having your shower, washing your face, brushing your teeth, shaving, flushing the toilet, so forth, first thing in the morning? Possibly nothing. Well, let me reverse the question. How did you feel, or how would you feel if you tried to open the tap and water doesn't run? Probably devastated. It's bad. Well, indeed, me too. Unfortunately, we take things for granted. We are creatures of habit. I can't but remember a statement made by one of the inhabitants of beautiful Aleppo in 2015 during the peak of the armed conflict. The gentleman told me, we are now used to live without electrical power supply, and we can live without. They can make do. But we cannot live without water. If water supplies do not resume, we will simply leave Aleppo. Women and girls often bear the brunt of suboptimal wash services, being the natural caregivers of respective households. If water is not provided at the household or in a nearby location, very nearby, girls and women often have to walk long distances to fetch water. Not only are they barred from other human rights such as education, but they can be subject to violence and exploitation. The same goes for sanitation and hygiene. In extreme cases, they may end up, I've seen it, they may end up losing their lives in suspicion of an honor issue. It's clear that WASH is central to protection and preventing gender-based violence. Imagine how would a school look like without adequate WASH facility. Inadequate WASH facilities lead to low retention rates and dropouts, absenteeism from schools, especially for girls, undignified school environments, especially for girls, and can increase public health risks. Imagine how would a healthcare facility, a hospital in very simple terms, look like without adequate WASH facility. Would it qualify as a healthcare facility in the first place? You know, I've seen pregnant women carrying 2 buckets of water, limping right and left as they head to a healthcare facility for delivering. Does that qualify as a healthcare facility in the first place? In the interest of time, I'll just limit it to education and health. WASH has historically been seen as an input to the health sector before it was declared as a human right. While WASH has always been seen key in preventing disease outbreaks such as cholera, Ebola, typhoid, etc., COVID had clearly demonstrated the centrality of WASH to public health. And as COVID had taught us all, nobody is safe until we are all safe. Last yet not least, according to a poll conducted by the British Medical Journal, sanitation is the greatest medical milestone of the last century and a half, followed by antibiotics. I thank you for your attention, and of course we will have the opportunity to take questions later on. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Omar. Cholpon, I have a feeling that you are going to second that very powerful message of Omar's, but we're very much looking forward to hearing your reflection.
Thank you very much, Suvi. Good afternoon, and thank you, Omar. I think through your contribution on the value of water in the armed conflicts, unfortunately, we are able to see the real value of water. So I would like to start with the very famous statement from the report of the Global High-Level Panel on Peace and Security, basically stating that the only substitute for water is water. And as I said, unfortunately, we are able to see the centrality of water in armed conflicts through the centrality of the wash services or lack of these in the post-conflict setting. So when we talk about the post-conflict setting and the meaning or the value of water, it can be, once again, as I said, the best examples come from the wash services or the lack of it. And basically, to me, reflecting on all of these multiple examples of how water and wash can be a source of conflict, but also this could be as the driver of peace, I was able to see clearly that restoring water supply, restoring the provision of wash services basically means the restoring this very normality or the life. And while it seems the conflict is over, what is known as a post-conflict setting is basically when the devastating consequences, the great vulnerability, but also uncertainty related to this, and other multiple contributory factors for a potential new conflict are still there for many months and possibly decades and years ahead. So with the great disturbances to what is called a normal life, food, shelter, family, and thank you, Amar, for really using this great example to show us what it means to be with water in your everyday life and without it. But basically, without these, in addition to this, we are also talking about this myriad of barriers that stand there on this return to normality when we are applying this to the post-conflict setting. But once again, as I said, the very value of water, I think, and the wash services is really about this rebuilding, restoring the very normality. What a terrifying number, 20 times more in children under 5 who are likely to die to exactly unsafe wash in this post-conflict setting. And basically, are we left with a choice when there is totally lack of this choice? When we are saying that you either stay with this unsafe wash services or you go deeper in this uncertainty in a search of a new source of home, of water. But I would like just, because it was very inspirational to really see those examples of evidence how rebuilding wash services in the field is also about rebuilding this normality in life. I think just as the goal 6, the goal 17, both transversal, both are exactly about being central in delivering the Agenda 2030. When we say about partnership for the goals, plus the goal 6, basically, it is exactly about turning the potential source of conflict into a positive driver of social cohesion and contributing to peace building, exactly as Omar, you shared. This very much touched my heart when you said that people are willing to do anything for settling back in their homes. And when really building on this, it's exactly about bringing in the SDG 17 and cooperation for rebuilding this normality. And finally, because I also represent the voices of young people, women, and in and for water, I would like to add that there is an absolute harmony and relevance when talking about the water and wash services provision in the post-conflict setting, because we also have the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, the UN Security Council Resolution 2250, and then also the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. So if, so I think that once again, and finalizing the point that the value of WASH, actually the centrality of WASH is about the value of water in post-conflict settings. And I think there is an absolute alignment across and between. Thank you.
Thank you, Cholpon. In our panel, we'll finally move to discussing the role of water as a catalyst of peace and in regional initiatives more specifically. We'll first hear from Dr. Saule Ospanova about the OSCE's, the world's largest security organization's activities in this regard. And I will give the floor to you, Saule.
So I press. Okay. Oh, very good. It's actually good to be to see how many people came to this session. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a pleasure to take part in this very important discussion on the value of water in times of armed conflict. Before going further, let me thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Government of Finland for tremendous support for our initiatives, but also for organizing this session. I'm grateful to join colleagues from Geneva Water Hub, from CMI, Martti Antisari Peace Foundation, the Finnish Environment Institute, and UNICEF on the panel today. For OSCE as a security organization, water is a strategic element and an essential tool of national and regional security. Water scarcity, lack of access to water, and pollution can threaten socioeconomic development and political stability and can be a potential trigger for tensions and conflicts. But at the same time, and you can see all the commitments listed of OSCE in the mandate on water management, and these are political commitments, consensual political commitments for 57 participating states. This is the reason why water diplomacy is critical for OSCE. And water can be a source of cooperation, enhancing security, prosperity, and environmental protection. Our projects and activities have been contributing to a more effective water governance and materializing benefits of transboundary water cooperation for strengthening trust, stability, and security across the OSCE area. Now, the OSCE area, I have to define as well that most of our projects and activities take place in Central Asia, in South Caucasus, in Eastern Europe, and in the Southeastern Europe. The OSCE is active in a number of river basins in these subregions with the support of OSCE field operations and missions and in very close cooperation with UNECE, UNDP, and other international organizations. Amongst our partners and in very close cooperation, we work with SIWI, for instance, and I think this World Water Week, actually, most of you have seen some of our joint sessions with SIWI, with Geneva Water Hub, with the support of the present donors. I think at least half of you participated in some of our sessions, and I will mention a couple of more topical issues a little later. Over the last year, over the last decade, let's say, over the last 2 decades actually, the OSCE has been supporting transboundary water cooperation specifically in the Dniester River Basin. The Dniester River Basin is between Ukraine and Republic of Moldova. A number of projects and activities took place, for instance, to support those particular riparian states and support of transboundary water cooperation. For instance, we very much supported signing of the Dniester Basin Treaty in 2012. Between 2017 and 2021, we implemented a large-scale global environmental facility supported project on enabling transboundary cooperation and integrated resources management in Dniester River Basin. And this led to the establishment of the Dniester River Commission. In fact, the endeavor was quite successful, and the network of practitioners and experts active to this day is now functional in Ukraine and Moldova. We rely on those experts to still continue conducting environmental assessments in water management, even in the most challenging circumstances. The commission itself has a website. If you Google Dniester River Commission, you will see a list of resources and various documents that are available in case you're interested to find out what that cooperation was all about. We also supported development of the Strategic Action Program on Climate Change and Adaptation to Climate Change. And of course, as you might imagine currently, even though we would have liked to continue this work, and we have a next phase of Global Environmental Facility, a financed project for Dniester River Basin. Those activities were disrupted by the war in Ukraine. Nevertheless, we are now initiating another project on assessing environmental impacts of war in Ukraine, where water-related impacts will be assessed as a component of this program. And so some of the experts who were active in the Dniester River Commission, but also wider, of course, related with the government of Ukraine, will be involved in this process in coordination with international experts. So we will start this work actually quite soon, later in fall, and hopefully in some other arenas we'll be able to update you about the results of this, or rather the process, how it will go on. The water diplomacy and conflict prevention is has been one of our central projects, together with the Women Water Management and Conflict Prevention Project. The OEC aims to enhance cooperation of a sustainable transboundary water resource through these activities, and through this particular project on water diplomacy, we implemented a series of innovative capacity building activities, including development of an e-learning course on water diplomacy and integration of water norms in peace building in partnership with Geneva Water Hub. This e-learning is now available online, and I encourage you to check it out. You can simply Google it and it will show up, and actually we are planning to apply this e-learning in specific training sessions and webinars together with Geneva Water Hub experts. And we have one of them, no, two of them right here, Mara and Dr. Lena Salame, also present in the audience. We also collaborated with the International Union for Nature Conservation to explore the application of digital tools on transboundary water cooperation. And building on the results of the discussion paper, Water Diplomacy, Best Practices in Transboundary Water Cooperation, we recently developed a briefing document on interlinkages between water and conflict prevention in the OACA area, with some implications for negotiation tools. And in fact, Dr. Lena Salame, the expert working on this paper, is here with us today. So hopefully during discussion, maybe there will be a moment for her to reflect on this. We also provide a valuable platform for women professionals and youth addressing water issues. I think most of you have heard maybe a lot about our Women in Water Diplomacy network. I'm a proud wearer of this pin, both as a member and supporter of this network. And if you see those pins in the audience, you know that these are the members or supporters of this initiative. And with the great actually support from Government of Finland and also Government of Sweden and other donors, we were able to solidify this network and also join forces with the Women on the Nile network. And on this slide, you can see all the highlights regarding this initiative. So as you can see, initially we developed the network in Central Asia and Afghanistan. And this project on women water management and conflict prevention, in fact, specifies exactly the focus on conflict prevention, which usually forms for OSCE the type of confidence building measures and interventions, which we design either at the request of our participating states or in cooperation with our international partners with support of our participating states. Please note that we are intergovernmental organizations, so, and also consensus driven. So all of the efforts are necessarily have to be coordinated with the governments of the participating states. Now, in the framework of this particular project and activity on women, water management and conflict prevention, in September 2021, we launched both the network together with our very strong partner, Regional Environmental Center in Central Asia, CAREC. You've heard also many references to these organizations, perhaps. And the network aims to enhance cooperation in the region through supporting capacity building and focusing mostly actually on capacity building activities and knowledge sharing practices. After engaging online for almost 10 months, in June 2022 at the Dushanbe Water Conference, the network met first time in person, and I have to say that it was one of those extremely rewarding activities to even be part of, and to say the least, to meet all the people in person you know very well even during this week is extremely rewarding experience. And yesterday and over the last 3 days, when we had both Women in Water Diplomacy Forum, and most of the members of the Women on the Nile and the network in Central Asia, Afghanistan met all for the first time. And you can only imagine 65, 70 women, strong professionals in their field. Cholpona Itahunova is a member, by the way. And it was a very rewarding but also very path forward encouraging sort of process. And so I would really like you to check out online a bit in more detail what this network is all about. We are also proud to be a co-organizer, of course, of this activity, and I would like to express once again my gratitude to all donors who provided financial support. There are many, many donors: the Global Environmental Facility, EU, governments of Finland, Switzerland, Austria, Sweden, Ireland, Liechtenstein, Poland, Japan, and others. And the reason I'm mentioning that, because actually it would be completely impossible to do such, to make such efforts without it. And I hope our productive discussions and exchange will continue as we approach the UN 2023 Water Conference in New York. We have some activities planned, and we would like also to discuss it in more detail with our partners. I will also add like one last point in 1 second, that our efforts currently in Ukraine are very challenging, to say the least. And we are trying to develop a series of assessments involving international experts and national experts. So I think probably some of you in the audience will have some interest or questions, and please send them to us. It will be very interesting to explore any sort of joint or collaborative, cooperative paths on how to approach some of these assessments and endeavors. And I hope that this effort on behalf of all the donor community will also be well coordinated and meaningful. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Saula, for highlighting examples of extremely impactful activities, and I'm sure you all agree that we've all been lifted up by the rising tide of women during this World Water Week. But let me now please enter the stage our two final speakers. First, we have Mr. Marwan El-Kreksi from CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, who will share his insights in peace mediation work in Middle East and North Africa region. And Ms. Elina Häkkinen from Aalto University will then reflect the discussion from the point of view of her research, focusing on the role of trust in water diplomacy. But please, Marwan and Elina, join us.
Shall I sit or?
Please do.
Okay.
And Marwan, I sort of have a very specific question for you. I think it's really valuable to have somebody from the peace mediation community in this very water-focused forum. So we'd be very keen to hear about your experiences in your work about the role of water, especially in conflict prevention and peace mediation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very pleased to be part of this distinguished panel. Maybe in the beginning it would be important to state that I'm not a water expert, nor is my organization CMI, but we are dialogue facilitation experts. The region I cover is the Middle East and North Africa region, and as you know, it's a region that has a number of ongoing armed conflicts. And many of these conflicts, in addition to having a local and national aspect, have a regional aspect. So we have regional rivalry in the Middle East playing out also in some of these national contexts. And one of these contexts is Iraq, where we worked for the past 2 years, at least, with support from Finland and Switzerland. And the objective of the work in Iraq was to facilitate a dialogue among Iraqis on how they see the role of Iraq in the region and what are the key topics or issues of contention between Iraq and its key neighbors. And with the process, a relatively long consultative process with civil society actors and government officials in Iraq, a number of issues emerged, and one of these issues was water as a key challenge between Iraq and its neighbors. So, in a way, we came into this situation not by design, but through the input that we received from the Iraqi stakeholders. And so based on that, we also engaged then in consultations with the key neighboring states in Iraq and proposed a workshop on the effects of climate change on transboundary water resources. It turned out to be well received as an initiative. So we organized in Baghdad in March the workshop with participation from Iran, Turkey, League of Arab States, Syria, and Jordan. And of course, participation of key Iraqi ministries. And I think for maybe people in the audience that are not well acquainted with the Middle East, it is the fact that these actors are meeting is in itself a positive sign and development. So in that sense, we were happy to be able to do that. There was a frank exchange on many of these common challenges. I mean, it's an informal discussion, so that helps as well. And of course, on the sidelines, there were also other discussions on other topics that were raised. So in that sense, I would say that this topic, despite the fact that it's quite sensitive, it also can help in certain cases to advance dialogue, and particularly in the Middle East and North Africa region, at least this particular case proved to be quite a successful one. Maybe some lessons learned from that process. I would say that it is quite important to have a cross-sectoral approach, either at the national level or even at the regional level. What I kind of noticed is that the water experts or the water people usually are well connected and they talk and there's no issues. But the problem is that their voices are not always heard within the circles that really matter in these countries, namely the security sector and circles close to the heads of state. So that's something that should be should be supported. Yeah, I mean, these are maybe my my experience on this, but we were very kind of encouraged by this experience, and we do hope that this can continue, because it's a region where regional cooperation is very dysfunctional. So among Arab states, on the one hand, it's not really working, but also between Arab states and key regional countries like Iran and Turkey, there are major issues. So if we can get something around water, that that would already be quite a good start. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Maru, and I think that's also a very powerful testimony, but also highlights the fact that diplomats are needed in water diplomacy. But thanks so much. But then, last but not least, I'd like to give the floor to Elina Häkkinen, who has been involved in developing the Finnish approach to water diplomacy and also researched the role of trust in water diplomacy and water diplomacy initiatives. So, Elina, what are the key issues you would like to highlight regarding the role of water in conflict prevention? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So first, I would like to echo the previous speakers. So I think what Saule mentioned about the gender mainstreaming and the role of gender equality in water sector is something that is very, very important. And gender should not be seen only as one separate sector, but mainstream throughout all water-related processes and projects. So I think in every single water-related project there should be a question. So how is this related? How will this project support and promote gender equality? And then at the same time, what kind of impacts does this project have on different genders? And I think this has a crucial role also in the perspective of water diplomacy, which is seen from the perspective of peace as well. So as a promoter of more sustainable water cooperation and peace. So I think that was a very, very important point there, and also the fact that there should be more women in the field of water diplomacy and in water in general. And I think the Women in Water Diplomacy Network strategy launch was an amazing example of that. And what Maruan said about the possibility of water as an entry point for broader regional dialogue and cooperation is something that is very interesting, and is something that would be important to study more and find more research on that topic, and maybe I will reflect a little bit that later. But I would like to point out two issues that are close to my heart. So one is the youth participation, and the second one is the role of trust in water diplomacy. That is my current research interest. So as we know, today's generation of young people is the biggest one we have ever seen in the world, and at the same time, young people, mostly it's the young people who are the majority of the population in countries, in states that are affected by armed conflicts. And then at the same time, young people are also a majority in countries that are in the risk of armed conflicts. And I think this underlines the importance of prevention as well, and the role of youth there. And then at the same time, I also want to underline that young people are the one who are calling for more ambitious climate policies, response to climate crises, and that is of course very closely interlinked to the field of water. So what kind of practical examples there would be to promote the participation of youth in water sector? I think Scholbel mentioned the Youth Peace and Security Resolution 2250. So that's something that could be maybe better seen also in the water diplomacy world and in the water sector. So there are many good handbooks and toolboxes on how to advance the role of youth in peace promotion and in conflict prevention. So that is something that maybe the water sector could have closer look into. And then the other point was the role of trust. Oh, and then I want to add that it was, I think it's very important that the Finnish Water Diplomacy Network has included junior reporters in their delegation. I think it's a good initiative, and I encourage others to do that as well, other organizations. And then also that we are young experts on the stage on this topic. And the other thing was the role of trust in water diplomacy that I'm very interested in. So as we know, as if water is seen as an entry point for conflict prevention, there is also something behind it which might be trust. And often trust is seen in the context of mistrust or lack of trust, but maybe we could also explore, because obviously there is trust out there as well, so we could maybe have a closer look at how trust emerges between stakeholders and what kind of practices there are to build that. And in the literature, I mean in the field, there are some examples of trust building practices such as sharing, taking the perspective of shared benefits, and also building and strengthening positive narratives between the stakeholders, as narratives are something that are very interlinked to the image of trust. And there are also the possibilities of organizing more informal and interpersonal meetings between the parties, which may be an important entry point for trust. But I think that is also related to the way we value water, and maybe as water may provoke strong emotions and narratives, those are also maybe possibilities where we could have a mutual learning, mutual understanding. So, I mean, it is maybe key to understand how the other party, how the other stakeholder values water and find common areas there. So, as said, the value of fresh water is so essential to our ecosystems, to our all life. So this is something that we should take as a relevant context to cooperate. And actually, I think we have no other choice than cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elina. Thank you to all of our panelists for your extremely important insights. We have touched upon the critical role of water in different phases of the conflict cycle and ways to also turn it to something beneficial as a source for peace and breaking the conflict cycle itself. We have now some time for questions and answers and comments, and while you come up with them in the audience, I would like to start with the question for Mara that I referred to at the beginning. You mentioned that the multiple weaknesses and challenges we have, but what kind of efforts are there to fill in these gaps and respond to the awareness-raising needs regarding international law as well?
Thank you for the question. I think, no, as I mentioned, it is very important to promote the knowledge of international humanitarian law in the external community, like in event like this or other international fora, and on the other side also not to promote the importance of the protection of water with armed forces, with military forces, and to sensitize to this topic. So I would like to mention a work that we have carried out at the Geneva Water Hub. That is a document called the Geneva List of Principles on the Protection of Water Infrastructure, where we collect the practices based on international agreements like the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols, and we try to systematize the existing rules on the protection of water during and after armed conflicts.
All right, thank you very much. And then I'd also like to ask Omar, you reflected on the role of WASH in post-conflict settings, but how about in conflict prevention? What kind of role does adequate WASH have in conflict prevention?
Well, again, back to the two spheres, and I'm going to focus on WASH now, not the water resources. The biggest problem we have across the world is inequality. Services are provided in inequitable manner. There are two angles to this aspect. The first, within a country, let's just for example, like within a country, given the inequalities, this starts to raise grievances between communities. Why is community X getting a better service than community Y? This immediately piles up, and it keeps on building up across the years, and ends up to weakening the horizontal social cohesion. It leads to tensions, and at times, in extreme states, it can lead to unrest and conflict, physical conflict. The other side to it is states are seen as, the social contract is a virtual contract between the state and the citizens. In a nutshell, it's composed of a group of basic social services. If the state is seen by the citizens as not delivering against its core functions, this starts weakening the vertical cohesion or the social contract. It doesn't erupt overnight. It keeps on building up over years, and it piles and piles, one element of the social contract on top of the other and so forth, until you reach a tipping point. Eruption takes place, civil unrest, and things start going wrong big time. So those are two roles. A third role is addressing pre-existing tensions. We have very concrete and promising examples from countries like in Lebanon and in Somalia and Afghanistan, where communities had pre-existing tensions. They had issues, sectarian, whatever it is. And they would never speak to each other, and they were just warring, really warring communities. We were able to bring them together to address wash issues, speaking to each other. Like Marwan was saying, it takes a little bit of time, but not years, months. It brings them together. They start realizing that they are different like each other. We're all different like each other. We're not different from each other. We're different like each other. And they start realizing that what connects them is more than what divides them. And it did end up addressing pre-existing tensions. It strengthened the horizontal social cohesion. The war ended. And we brought in the state, because already the social contract had collapsed. And it's not a rosy picture, but it's much, much better than what it used to be 5, 6, 7 years ago. I hope I've covered. Thank you.
Very well, thank you. And I think it's really important to emphasize that besides the transboundary cooperation discourse as a source of peace, we should also pay attention to the role of WASH as a source of peace, as you very eloquently put it. I have a feeling Saule would like to give the floor to a colleague who would probably want to highlight one of your recent works and guideline developments.
Sure. Of course, actually, I already made that reference, and I just wanted to also say, of course, we have all these wonderful papers, e-learnings, and various interventions. But just to piggyback on our, wonderful discussants, remarks, that basically, for trust building and confidence building, actual interventions, it does require a lot of sort of fine and nuanced work and nuanced engagement, both on the political side, on the professional side, on the gender mainstreaming side, and youth engagement. And so I think all of these messages are actually now coming all together into that message. So I would like to pass the sort of a floor and the maybe mic possibly to our colleague, Dr. Lena Salamet, to just reflect maybe on the work that Geneva Water Health, but also her personally have done for OSCE in addressing negotiation norms and peace building.
Thank you, Saule. Thank you, Suvi. So I have several hats. I feel a little bit schizophrenic. But the first hat that I have is one actually very personal that reflects upon the question that Dr. Omar has asked us. How did you feel when you took a shower this morning? Well, I felt very privileged because less than 24 hours ago, I was in a place where I had no water, no electricity, and no warm water either. So I did feel very privileged taking a very warm shower with a big flow of water coming in from the shower here in Stockholm. So, but I do understand how you turned the question around, asking people here, how would you feel if you didn't have water when you turn on the tap? Because most of us here in this part of the globe do not realize that there are many places where we don't have that privilege. So that hat. A second hat is the work that I'm doing with pleasure with OSCE about negotiation tools. Actually, we have, listening to everyone here, I can say that we have two layers of crisis. We have an environmental crisis, and indicators of environmental integrity are dropping. We have also a layer of security crisis with all the the displaced people, the conflicts that are happening, the death toll that is happening. So we have a double layer of crisis that need to be halted. And in order to halt this, there has to be decisions to be taken by government and intergovernmental organizations such OSCE, and interventions that would actually have to happen and involve changes at a pace and at a level that have not been seen before, really to really revert the trend of this double crisis. And changes, as just we heard, changes can bring about turmoil and uncertainty in the communities. So if organizations such as OSCE want to be involved in such changes to revert the trend of these crises, it has to go through projects such as the ones it is leading now by involving communities such as the women, for example, in water diplomacy, engaging the communities, these people who have to be part of the design and of the implementation in order to ensure the success of the implementation. So this is one tool, one initiative that OSCE is doing, and OSCE being one of the, if not the largest security organization in the world, is the best place to tackle this environmental and security crisis at the same time, because it is inherently an organization that tackles both subjects at the same time. And what we have been doing is a big collection of tools of water diplomacy. One of them is, for example, related to capacity building and building not only institutional capacities and individual capacities, but network capacities that go across sectors and across boundaries and across continents. Also, tools related to data sharing and the use of data, the digitalization of data, and so on, in order for decision making to be made on the basis of sound data. Otherwise it can't, it can only go wrong. And then tools also related to the facilitation and the support of institutions including river basin organizations and the establishments of treaties and agreements. The facilitation of such tools and bringing them and giving them a scope that is bigger than water. So either they start with water and they are progressive and they go beyond water, or they include from the very beginning many topics, including water. So there are many issues that can be covered, but I just wanted to highlight these issues. But Sauli, please tell me if I missed something that that you had in mind.
I think I will just add to this that the idea that we had in mind was to actually bridge, the connections between local interventions, but also international efforts. So I think some of this, they fall in between. So there is, of course, networking capacity, the legal frameworks, very important legal instruments that either enable or, plateau some of the developments, and then bridging the local interventions with international efforts. That is one of our recently most interesting efforts, because we have, for instance, some interventions, not just OSCE, but I mean in general. For instance, in some transboundary settings on the borders, there are a variety of community engagements, for instance. And then there are national engagements at the institutional level with the building legislation or specifically conflict prevention mechanisms. And this is all part of, obviously, international efforts in partnership with other organizations. And so the kind of operationalization, I guess, of these interventions also is on the way, I guess. And so this was our attempt to assess what's out there and to have a bit of a comprehensive picture what's available to us as far as the negotiation tools and water management are concerned. So hopefully once we're done with this work, we can maybe share it for review, and maybe we'll welcome the comments. So this is an evolving work, and we will definitely welcome the review and comments from the participants of this session and beyond. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Saule. Our time is starting to come to its end, but I really do hope that we can continue the discussion after the session and really encourage everyone to stay in touch with us. And I'm next going to invite Antti Rautavaara from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs to explain in a bit more detail on what we had in mind regarding that engagement and how to take the messages we've been discussing today, how to take them forward.
Thank you, everyone, and the panelists and speakers, and especially Suvi and whoever has been part of the organizing of the event. So my name is Antti Rautavaara, and I used to be 4 years old when the previous UN Water Conference took place. 4 years old. I'm a bit older now. So it means that this might be the only UN Water Conference during my life or during my professional career. And that was one of the sort of thoughts that we had when we thought, let's not just talk here, but let's try to put something on paper and make sure that we influence the wider discussions. So if you're fiddling with your phone or with your laptop, now put them aside. I want to get your attention on this. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read this through, but with this crowd of people and with these organizations, we have given a very thorough thought on the water and peace, on the time span as it was discussed. And we have put together an expert opinion paper or piece, which is looking at the water and peace from the angles of prevention and during the conflict and post-conflict. And it's around, I can show the next slide, it's around 2 to 3 pages for now. But what we are going to be doing is keeping it very short, and when the paper is ready, we're going to be sending it to UN PGA office preparing for the conference, as well as the 2 co-hosts, Netherlands and Tajikistan. So we, as we say here, we say that these are not representing the organizational views, because we know that it would take a year to agree on every single comma and dot on the document, but we say that this is an expert opinion of those experts who participated here today. I think we are quite aligned with the paper already, but we really hope that the organizations or you as persons coming from some very important organizations want to sign on into it. So we're going to have roughly a 1.5 weeks process here. So Suvi, who was putting this session together, by 8th of September, so I think that next week, Thursday, drop an email to Suvi, and on 8th, she will send the document, the draft document, whoever wants to get acquainted and read it. And then by 13th, we need your comment, your ideas, the views that we have missed. And we can then put them into the document. By 15th, we're gonna be then sharing this with those who are directly involved with the preparation of the conference. And as my colleague Katja Alfors said in the beginning, the water and peace is not on the agenda directly at this point, but I think we can try to push and try to get it included, if not as a separate topic, underneath the other topics. So on my own behalf, thank you for everyone, especially the speakers and the organizers.
Thank you, Antti, and thank you to all our excellent panelists and everyone in the audience here and online. And as said, let's stay in touch and continue to work on this together. Thank you.